Right here, right now, we have two guys that have so much experience when it comes to signing day. So Cooper, I'm going to start with you here. It's become, this signing day on February 1st has become pretty subdued over the years with the introduction of the early signing period. But from a roster management standpoint, you've been a part of a lot of these programs, a part of Power 5 teams. I mean, what is it like leading up to signing day?
Well, it continues to evolve. The way it is now is really not the way it was 2 years ago or so. And the reason I say that is because you have the new transfer portal window. And I think what that does, along with spring and summer official visits, that accelerates the timeline for recruits. And the hay is in the barn really in December 21st. That's when the first signing period was. For the majority of the programs across the country, they're going to want to have at least 90% of their targets signed on the dotted line. Yes, there might be a player or two that you're willing to wait for, like 5-star athlete Nyckoles Harbor or 4-star quarterback Jaden Rashada. Those guys are worth waiting. But now what you're seeing with the majority of the high school players signing in December, really December to January, starting with that transfer portal window on December 5th, that 45-day window, December 5th to January 15th, the attention is really going to start to change to the transfer portal. And the months leading up to that are just as important. The board is going to be set. You're going to know what your priorities are. And then it becomes about attacking best player available, position of need, and trying to build some competitive depth on your roster.
This part of the signing period, the February signing day, like Cooper said, is kind of anticlimactic because most of the big moves were made in December. But when you're looking at it from when I was a high school coach, I would always be making sure that we didn't have any surprises coming down the stretch and that I knew everything that was going to happen before we actually signed on signing day. Colleges always would send those letter of intents in to those kids a day or two before signing day. It used to be FedEx. Now they do a lot of emails. If I had a kid that was supposed to sign with a school and he was committed, but when I got to my mailbox, if I have 4 different letters of intent, I knew I needed to call them because something may be about to change and I hadn't considered it yet or I didn't know what was going on. But I have more than one letter of intent for the same kid. And so I have to know if we're going to have a major shock on signing day.
So you're saying that the fax machine is not the star of signing day anymore? That's changed, Carl? Sad to hear.
Oh, yeah, that's definitely changed. This technology has changed. Everybody's operating out of email now.
Oh, that's too bad. All right. Cooper, I've got to ask you this, just because you've been a part of some of these Power 5 staffs. I know you worked in Oregon and Washington, and you've seen that side of things. But back when you were working with them, it is kind of different, the process of having that early signing period. It's not just the early signing period, though. You've got the transfer portal, you have coaching changes, everything that's going on. How has the process of roster building changed with all this, condensation of all of the crazy things going on in college football at the exact same time now?
I think you're seeing more of a leniency into the portal. I mean, I don't think, especially with the contenders, typically what I thought about this a year or two ago when the transfer portal was kind of revealed, and now that we've seen a higher volume of players, I thought for contenders, we'd see 7 or 8 guys maybe that they'd leave room for now. But now you're seeing teams like LSU, who have the #1 transfer portal program in the country right now in the rankings, And this is a team that already has double-digit commitments on that end in terms of the transfer portal. Ole Miss, the way that they have utilized the portal, they had 13 players signed this year, 12 signed, 1 committed currently in the 2023 class via the high school level, 13 players signed via the transfer portal as well. So in terms of that balance, I think every team is going to be different. I think that kind of depends on where you are in the pecking order. I think national perception is really important. And we've seen teams like TCU who've had a lot of success this year on the field. That surprised a lot of people. But what they've done with that, now going into Sonny Dykes' second year, they've been able to attract a lot of talent that they wouldn't have necessarily been in on from day one. Guys like JoJo Earl from Alabama, Trey Sanders, another name, Jack Besh from LSU, Avery Helm from Florida. The list goes on and on. So now you have these programs who are starting to find their way and navigate the transfer portal the right way. That is the biggest difference, I would say, is now you have another pathway to build a contending team right away and for the long term as well.
When a kid is coming out of high school and he's looking at recruiting, He's looking at a particular block of schools. But the thing about the transfer portal and what has that done for colleges is it's put schools in a position to recruit players that they weren't in a position to recruit or sign out of high school. Because what a player is looking for coming out of the transfer portal is a completely different situation than what he was looking for coming out of high school. A lot of guys that come out of high school are logo chasing, or they only want to play for one of the 6 to 8 top brands in all of college football. But when you come out of the portal, you're looking for immediate playing time. You're looking for NFL fit. They aren't as enamored with some of the bells and whistles that they were coming out of high school. And so that becomes a significant part of transfer portal recruiting. So schools like TCU can get involved on some of the higher level kids in the portal that maybe they couldn't get coming out of high school.
It makes me think of, when you go from your first job to your second job, you have standards, right? You learn what you like, what you don't like, what you really want out of that second job. And so, the transfer portal kind of changes from that perspective of what you thought you wanted as a player coming out of high school changes when you're in it and you go through it. So from that perspective, Carl, as all of these things happen at the same time with transfer portal and roster retention, how have you seen staffs grow or change? Are there new positions that you're seeing now added to staffs?
Well, the recruiting departments have swelled up, the off the field, the personnel guys, recruiting coordinators. Everybody has a GM now, director of player personnel. You have so much support staff to handle the players because not only do you have to recruit guys coming in, you have to also try to keep guys from leaving that you really want to stay. So it's a consistent management of the roster, and the coaches can't do that alone. You have to have a beefed up support staff and recruiting department. And if you don't have that, you're way behind in today's game.
We're starting to see the evolution of college football take place right in front of us. As Carl mentioned, I mean, these recruiting staffs and departments are starting to balloon. And it's not just high school recruiting. Now you have to have a player personnel department really primarily focused on players in the transfer portal as well. And there's other facets to this as well. We're talking about the marketing side, the NIL side of it, the on-campus side of it, what we've seen with Billy Napier and the investment that Florida has made in that regard. I think that is slowly going to inch towards being the standard in college football. And I want to follow up on another point that Carl made. Official visits in today's college football, there's only 5 of them, right? So what I mean by this is they're all important because going through this process now with the transfer portal and with the volume that we see of transfer portal entries, that type of exposure that you're going to have on that official visit very well may be the thing that dictates whether or not you are going to be a factor later in the recruitment when that player enters the transfer portal. So I think the relevance of that is definitely something to consider as well.
Yeah, another kind of short-term problem that we're dealing with right now is the extra year of eligibility due to COVID. And so until that cycles out too, that could, make it more difficult for roster building and just the sheer amount of roster spots that there are because a lot of these players are staying a lot later in college football than they might otherwise. Both of you guys, as I mentioned, have so much experience with this. I mean, Carl's got a great wall of coaches behind him. You've talked to a lot of these coaches. You've consulted with a lot of them. But Carl, you also have the player perspective side of things. And from both of your standpoint, I want to do some signing day storytelling time because I think not a lot of people realize what goes in to signing day and commitments and just the chaos that happens between the time when a player gets that initial offer from a team to the time that they sign in the dotted line. So Cooper, I'm going to start with you. Is there a story that you have to tell?
Absolutely. I got a good one. I was kind of going through it when I saw this on the rundown. And one from Michigan. I was there in 2017 as a recruiting coordinator under Jim Harbaugh. And you work all year around, right, to put this board together. It's something you have a lot of pride in. And everybody's pulling in the same direction. I remember one day in the middle of December, before the signing period was in February at this point, we have a staff meeting, and all of a sudden there's a new name on the commit list. That name was Ronnie Bell. And at the time, nobody knew anything about Ronnie Bell, the receiver from Park Hill High School in Kansas City, Missouri. He was formerly committed to Missouri State for basketball. Coach Harbaugh found out about him through his brother-in-law. This was a guy that we ended up taking, really didn't even go through the evaluation process with him, but he was a fantastic basketball player, 2-sport athlete, averaged over 14 points on the hardwood. We ended up taking him. 4-year starter at Michigan, one of the guys that's been really dependable for the Wolverines over the last 4 years and enjoyed a lot of success there. I wouldn't say that's the normal way you should go about your business, but it worked out there and always something I'll remember.
Yeah, we've heard that name now, haven't we, Carl?
Oh, yeah, we've heard that name. We've heard that name.
Carl, do you have any stories for us? I know you've already done some storytelling on this show before with Mike Norvell and just some of the interactions with him, but what stands out to you about these days over the years?
You know, we've had some great recruiters come through. I've coached some great players. I had a player that was an Army All-American, Antonio Doyle, who initially went to Texas A&M. And while he was getting recruited by Texas A&M, he was getting recruited by everybody in the country. Their linebacker coach at the time, he came to our school to visit Antonio at 8 o'clock in the morning. He went to every class with him. We had chapel at Lutheran North at 10:15. He went to chapel. He ate lunch with him. He talked to every single teacher. He had a meeting at 1 o'clock with the guidance counselor. As we were getting ready for our game on Friday night, he was in the special teams meeting, the offensive meeting, the defensive meeting. He talked to the officials at halftime. When the game was over and the dads were frying fish, he picked up a spatula and he started frying fish and ate with the dads. He had to be out there till 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. He put in a full day of recruiting, and Antonio Doyle ended up going to Texas A&M. I had never seen a guy put in a day like that the way that Bradley Del Pevedo did that day, one of the legendary recruiters in college football.
Cooper, you're hearing that story. How unique is it to see a guy put in that much time and effort, and not a lot of sleep is had this time of year?
I was fortunate enough to be around Bradley Del Pevedo at LSU back in 2014 when I was an intern. That guy had some charisma. He had a lot of energy about him. There's just some guys that are just blessed with that. And then you add a little bit of sauce in there. You add the competition. They got to be able to go out. They got to get their guy. They got to get their net, and they got to reel him in. You know, Mario Cristobal was like the most maniacal guy that I had ever been around. We've heard the stories 24/7, 365. But, you know, he was a pain in my rear end because that's the way it was. You show up at work at 6 a.m. and you'd be considered late. That's just kind of the way that he rolled. But you wonder why guys like that are so successful. And listen, when it comes to recruiting, you can get a lot done with just hard work, relationship building, and sweat equity, which is what we've seen with a lot of the top recruiters in the country.
Bradley Del Pevedo had a lot of swag. Another funny story, Emily, when I had Ronnie Perkins, Calvin Thibodeau was the D-line coach at Oklahoma. And he called me the very first time we met, and he said, "Do you want me to meet you in your office at the field house?" And I say, "Brother, this is North St. Louis. This ain't Texas. Ain't no field houses in St. Louis."